Hello and welcome to Economic Divide. I'm your host, Kavit Athlete. Every baby that is born brings with it promises of advancement and development for where they are born, which in some ways contributes to the economy. But what if that population was on the decline in a very major way around the world? Well, that is the topic of this edition of Economic Divide. Some of the headlines of this program: population stagnation, fertility bust, fact or myth? Have deaths started to exceed births? We will be checking out the numbers and see which countries are suffering from this and, of course, its economic impact. Then, the era of high fertility. Is it ending? But why? Is it because women have gained more access to education, perhaps, and contraception? Maybe migration to urban cities is the cause, or is the reason purely economical? In order to take a look at that, our next highlight is going to be case studies. We're going to be taking a look at countries. Which countries are suffering the most from declining populations? Is it China, which just allowed couples to have 3 children, or Italy, where maternity wards are shutting down, and Japan has long been facing declining birth rates? And finally, one continent is going against a wave of low childbirth, and that is Africa. Countries there are outpacing the rest of the world, like in Niger, 7 children per woman, followed by Mali and Senegal. But believe it or not, these countries are on a downward trajectory.
The world population is always growing. The young and the old intersect paths. One group enters the workforce, the other retires. New ones enter this world, and the cycle continues. Most thought the world population had peaked, but there were warnings that it had entered a declining stage. Imagine entire regions where everyone is 70 or older. Imagine governments laying out huge bonuses for immigrants and mothers with lots of children. Imagine a gig economy filled with grandparents and Super Bowl ads promoting procreation.
There's a general viewpoint that a world with less people would be less burdensome on some key areas. Well, for starters, it is perceived that less people means more resources would be available. Climate change will not be as severe, and the impact on the environment would be less.
Just as significant as the increase in numbers is the fact that the global population is aging. Across the globe, the distribution of the population by age is shifting upward from younger to older ages.
But there's another side to the story when it comes to low fertility or fewer babies being born. It could actually have a detrimental effect on society. Fewer babies being born into this world would eventually translate into fewer workers. This would then mean that there would be more retirees. Just think about it. This could potentially turn societies upside down. The notion that a surplus of young people will drive economies and help pay for the old.
The majority, as I said, of the disaster displacement that we recorded is 98% of it is weather related. So we can only expect, with the future impacts of climate change, for these disasters to become more frequent and more intense in the future, and therefore for the numbers of internally displaced people to grow.
Well, the population is declining, not increasing. The myth that the population is exploding and the world is overwhelmed with people is just not true. The declining population growth is all over the world. Just looking at the stats here, continent-wise, Europe's population is expected to decline the most by the year 2050, while Africa is expected to have the strongest population growth of any region. And the economic impact, that should be looked at through the lens of declining working age populations, where you can see the projected change. European countries like economic powerhouse Germany and then Italy, for example, are declining, with Japan registering the most in Asia. But the OECD countries, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which comprises of 38 countries, shows a positive trend, even though that number is also in dispute. We have been covering how population decline can pose a threat to the world and its economy, but we haven't covered how that trend can be reversed. For that, let's go with Russia, since they're doing all that they can to prevent their population from decreasing. Boosting the national birth rate, well, that's a top priority for President Vladimir Putin, who has made this one of the key issues for his presidency, including cash incentives.
Судьба России и ее историческая перспектива зависит от того, сколько нас будет настораживать. Наша историческая обязанность ответить на этот вызов. Не только выбраться из демографической ловушки, но и к середине наступающего десятилетия обеспечить устойчивый естественный рост численности населения страны. Нам необходимо поддержать молодых людей, тех, кто начинает семейную жизнь и, уверен, мечтает о детях.
But the country that tops the list in pushing countries to have, or pushing people to have children, that country is Sweden. Now, these are the stats which shows how determined the government is to increase its population. 480 days parental leave at 80% of earnings. Child benefits are 130 euros per child per month, increasing with each child. Now, you would think that would help the fertility rate. Believe it or not, it has not. The fertility rate in Sweden has actually fallen from 2.1 children per couple from 1990 to 1.6 for the year 2020. We're headed for a quick break here on Economic Divide, but don't go anywhere. We have plenty more coming up. But before we go for a break, here is a story of a man from Pakistan and his children, not one, not two. Well, it opens a window into why there's a rise and fall of populations around the world. In this case, a big rise.
Statistika na, kadai si tadat jutsi kana, tadato kadai si nur jutsi. O dal machine me chiti kana, daho po 100 po 150 na juti kana.
Since we have low literacy rate in the country, so therefore our growth rate is comparatively higher than the developed countries' growth rate, and we have more population increase with the passage of time as compared to the developed countries. Definitely we need to educate the population, educate the masses to have a reasonable size of the family size, so that all these requirements could easily be met, and your resources should be there to meet their requirements.
It's time now for a Q&A. Let's bring in Paul Sheldon Foote. He's a professor of accounting at California State University. His publications include Biometrics, Sarbanes-Oxley Compliance, and SAP ERP Systems. Well, Paul, welcome to Economic Divide. Taking a look at what the New York Times has said, planet with fewer people could ease pressure on resources, slow the destructive impact of climate change, and reduce household burdens for women. But the census announcements from China and the U.S. have showed slower rates of population growth in decades, also pointing to hard-to-fathom adjustments. Can you name what some of those adjustments may be?
Well, it's easy to claim that, yeah, if you have fewer people around, that's fewer resources needed per person. But as I noted, if you have fewer people around and they're not marrying and they want separate houses or separate apartments, that takes resources. And we have the improvement of medical technology, people living longer. Well, people living longer have huge medical expenses. Also, they want to retire at young ages. And that means you need younger workers, and plenty of them, to pay into the Social Security system to enable retired people to live a decent retired life.
In an upscale Beijing mall, Chinese husband and wife are working out in a trendy gym. Good break from their hectic jobs. They are the younger generation of Chinese who spend life tending to themselves rather than following the tradition of having babies. Eating out is also part of that, spending time together without the burden of a child.
那如果说有了小朋友，其实对我来说，我感觉我的事业就会突然间断掉，因为2-3年的间隔的话，我不一定能很好的去适应职场。
These kinds of couples are worrying the Chinese government.
In big cities, that's a clear trend, right? It takes people a long time to be educated. After they graduate from the college, they have to look for jobs and have financial security before they establish family and raising children, right? So this process is long. So I think Chinese people are getting married at rather late stage, right? And now it's also quite a risky business to raise children in big cities.
It's time now for our in-depth section. Did you ever wonder how many babies are born into this world every day? Well, we're going to take a look at an interactive that shows how many babies are born on each continent, every second, every minute, and every hour that passes. Let's take a few seconds to check it out. There you have the continent breakdown: East Asia and Pacific, Europe and Central Asia, Latin America and Caribbean. Let's see who's in the lead right now. Looks like Sub-Saharan Africa is in the lead, 1520, 1593. And you can see the numbers, how rapidly they're progressing. Believe it or not, these are the children that are coming into this world. Now, let's break this down. This figure may astound you. Around 385,000 babies are born daily. And breaking it even further than that, we're going to look at a number that calculates per minute. That number is 270 daily births that are happening per minute. Well, here's the UN on the population numbers for the future.
From an estimated 2.5 billion people in 1950, the global population has grown more than threefold and now numbers around 7.7 billion. Using demographic and statistical methods, we have projected the global population forward to 2100. Our latest projections indicate that growth will continue, and that the global population could number around 9.7 billion in 2050 and 10.9 billion in 2100.
Well, the question coming from the opponents are, with 270 babies born each minute, how many people can the Earth sustain? That is the key question. So many people coming into this world. I mean, are these numbers sustainable? On the one hand, there are critics that argue the population of the world has long since surpassed what they have called optimal levels. That's on the one hand, but there's another camp that's countering that. They are saying that consumption is as important as population levels. And then you have others that argue another case, that overpopulation is coming out of the poor parts of the world with large growth rates and not at richer regions which use disproportionately high amounts of resources. Well, let's take a look at the truth. I mean, the truth really is that populations are declining. This warning, that is, was issued a long time ago by the UN, especially on how women had become more educated.
Gender equality and the empowerment of women are gaining ground worldwide. More people are living longer, are living healthier lives. More girls are in school. Fewer women are dying in pregnancy and childbirth. There are more laws to protect and uphold human rights.
And here is the former ECB Bank President Mario Draghi with his warning.
The euro area's working age population is projected to start gradually decreasing in the next decade. In that context, employment growth is likely to start decelerating in the not too distant future. Even with determined structural reforms, as a higher share of people in work will no longer be able to offset the fall in working age population.
You heard the words there: decelerating, decreasing. Okay, the key here lies in the young population. You just mentioned it there, when it comes to the economy. Now, the young population can contribute vastly to the economic advancement, provided the governments invest in education, healthcare, and jobs.
The world's young people now number a record 1.8 billion. Never before have there been so many people between the ages of 10 and 24. And never again is there likely to be so much potential for economic and social progress. While young people have the potential to change the world for the better, they can do it only if they're healthy, they're educated, their capabilities are developed, they have rights, they have a voice, and they have real opportunities and choices in life.
A lot of ifs there. Well, there are three predictors that contribute to the decline that we have been mentioning in fertility rates. The first predictor is urbanization. Housing is much cheaper in urban areas, like on a farm. A child is useful labor there, and housing is cheap. Now in the city, there's less work, so as populations urbanize, their birth rates fall. Now the second predictor is women's education, and basically the better educated a woman is, the less chances of her having children because they are not great for careers. That's just how it goes. And the third one, believe it or not, is religion. The more religious you are, more chances you have of having more children.
دا خدای بگی چې 50 کاله مخکې 50 کاله مخته دا هر سړی ته رسیدي کړی دو 50 کاله مخکې راځي د غنن صاحب خلک یقین نشته مو په خدای یقین دی چې د پیدا کړی رجوب دار سوي دروي سبانو کچھ در زیره سوالي نه وي چې چا یقین وي چې چا ایمان مضبوط.
You can see how religion plays a part there. Okay, we need some clarification. We need some enlightenment here about some of the facts. Our guest William Beeman joins us. Now, William Beeman is an American scholar and a professor of anthropology at the University of Minnesota. He has authored many articles, 14 books on Iranian politics, theater, language, and culture. Well, William Beeman, welcome. The New York Times says all over the world, countries are confronting population stagnation, that there is a fertility bust, that's how they described it, a reversal unmatched in recorded history. Obviously, this didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't because of COVID-19. What leading factors do you attribute for this phenomenon?
There are two factors that we need to take into account. First are biological factors, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The second are social factors, and the social factors are perhaps the most important aspect of this. After all, in the world, only women can have children. And so changing patterns of employment and choices that women make about their lives have greatly impacted the birth rate of families throughout the world. Let me take Japan as a case. We've known that the population in Japan has been declining for some time. It used to be that unless a woman was married in Japan, she had no social role. In the 1970s, after a woman was 29, she could no longer actually even stay within the workplace. They would essentially fire her because she wasn't young enough any longer.
India's population stands at approximately 1.38 billion people. The UN says its population might exceed China in the year 2028 to reach 1.45 billion.
The rising population is one of the biggest threat to our nation as well as our universe also. And I don't know why the government has not taken any measure. I am not particularly pointed any particular government right from the beginning.
The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, when he was the Mayor of London, once boasted about how the population in the UK, in particular London, was experiencing a population boom.
Growth is inevitable in London now. London's the biggest city in Europe, in Western Europe anyway. It has huge population growth.
But things did not turn out that way. Brexit and COVID-19 dealt a blow to the population increases. But the UK is not alone. In all of the EU, the population is aging, while at the same time, birth rates are falling.
There definitely should be concern because early action is needed. But what we've shown is through myriad measures, ranging from labour market participation to fiscal issues to solving vulnerability to poverty to combating the health challenge, countries can actually do a lot.
In Niger, the population is exploding. It is projected to increase from approximately 23 million in the year 2019 to around 30 million by 2030 and to reach 70 million by 2050. The reason? Religion. Islam in this case.
Avec l'expansion, ça va être une situation insupportable si on se limite seulement au traitement. C'est pour cela, depuis un certain moment, on met plus d'accent, on fournit plus d'efforts dans la prévention, en plus du traitement.
But the population boom has made many regions become food insecure.
nono ya dauke babu abin da ta kasha ta kuka na sai mata madara.
In Italy, the population decrease has reached a point where a town on the island of Sicily is selling off dozens of homes for just €1 to increase the population and to revitalize the economy.
Quando abbiamo avuto l'attenzione dei media internazionali significa dai primi di agosto, quindi 15 giorni, abbiamo avuto circa 1000 richieste di acquisto di case, ne abbiamo già formalizzate 15 di quelle gratis.
Japan has been experiencing a population decrease for quite some time. The number of births fell to a little over 8 million in the year 2020, down 2.8% from a year earlier, and the lowest since records began in 1899.
This will be a problem because it will affect Japan's society and economy. Last April, there was a report that the number of women are declining. Especially in the rural areas, the number of young women are decreasing. Therefore, it is said that the rural areas could disappear and become difficult to administer.
Time now for our Info News section of the program where we review some of the stories that we believe were worth mentioning here. Now, we've covered it before because it keeps popping its head in the news, and this is the story of the dollar. We call it the unfair dollar, and this means the U.S. dollar has political problems. Investment guru Jim Rogers has said that. Now, what they do is, according to him, the U.S. gets angry, and when it gets angry at you, they use sanctions. The Islamic Republic of Iran being the forefront of that. They say that you cannot use it. This is while international currency is supposed to be neutral. Well, that shows just the U.S. and how it treats the dollar as leverage. Next, G7 tax breakthrough is what was announced just days ago. The G7 nations reaching a historic deal on global tax reform. Well, the group of 7 have backed the U.S. proposal that calls for corporations around the world to pay at least 15% on earnings. Now, the key word or the key phrase is at least. Why is that a key phrase? We're going to go to the next item to find out exactly what relevance that has. The relevance comes here. When it comes to U.S. taxes, well, you have 6 U.S. tech giants that paid almost $100 billion less in taxes from the years 2011 to 2020. That's the news that came out of the States. I mean, the U.S. needs to get its own house in order before it can claim success outside of its borders. That's just a recommendation. Well, we here at Economic Divide have brought you this story last month, and we will again highlight this very important development. It has to deal with food inflation. Global food prices have posted the biggest jump in a decade. By how much? The surge is quite a lot. If you take a look at it, it's going to come up in a second. You're looking at a surge that is in the area of 40% in the cost of agricultural commodities, which in turn has raised the specter of accelerating inflation. The fact that populations are declining is not a positive development. However, it's not the end of the world either. Shrinking populations generally tend not to have a middle ground. However, this is only a temporary state, albeit that it takes time for it to balance itself out. Countries have to learn to adapt themselves to the changing population landscape. Now, as we covered in this program, governments need to make sure that money and resources are spent, especially in rural areas, to make sure that mass urbanization doesn't take place or takes place at a moderate level. And finally, fair distribution of wealth needs to occur so the economic worry or costs are lessened. But how could that happen when the world's billionaires, around 2,000 of them, have more wealth than 4.6 billion people who make up 60% of the planet's population? That does it for this edition of Economic Divide. It was great having you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. From me, Kavitavli, it's goodbye.